Good afternoon, boys and girls. The my favorite sob sit, Too Dumb for Truth, asked a question or made a comment. It's always hard to tell with these guys, but I'm gonna say he asked a question. He provided a link to the oral arguments in Kansas v. Glover. In case you're not familiar with Kansas v. Glover, it is a case where an officer ran a plate, determined that the owner of a vehicle had a suspended driver's license, and so he then felt that he had reasonable suspicion to pull the vehicle over and check the driver's license. The driver turned out to be the owner of the vehicle who had a suspended license, and he was given a ticket, etc. Now, this is a weird case where somebody fought a traffic ticket all the way up to not just the Kansas State Supreme Court, but the U.S. Supreme Court. So, the reason why it's in the U.S. Supreme Court is because for whatever reason, the Kansas Supreme Court said that the police didn't have reasonable suspicion. They needed something more than just the knowledge that the owner of the vehicle had a suspended license. So now you have a background of what the case is. The issue that Too Dumb for Truth had was that on what he called page 25, it's actually page 24 of the transcript. The first page is unnumbered, so if you're looking at in a PDF viewer, it would be page 25, but if you're looking at the page numbers, it's page 24. The lawyer for the petitioner, Kansas, said that a vehicle stop is less intrusive than a custodial arrest. I'll let you think about that for a second while I take a sip of my delicious chemically beverage. A vehicle stop is less intrusive than a custodial arrest. Too Dumb for Truth continues with vehicle stops are custodial arrests, and that's not the case. You know that's not the case because, number one, no court in this successive line of cases, all the way from the initial trial court to the Court of Appeals, if Kansas has one, to the Kansas Supreme Court, to the U.S. Supreme Court, no court has ever said that all traffic stops are custodial arrests, or that any traffic stops are custodial arrests. A custodial arrest is a very fact-based inquiry. And that's generally speaking where you are in the officer's custody. That's why it's called a custodial arrest. Now, sovereign citizens like to play word games like, oh, you arrested my travel. You arrested my forward momentum. That makes me under arrest. No, it's a legal term, and it's only useful in a legal context. What's the functional difference between being arrested and being detained? Well, in the real world, there's not much. You can't leave. You got to stay. You got to follow the officer's directions. You're under arrest / detained. Something's going on where you're not free to leave. But in the legal world, there is a difference. The cops can ask you all sorts of questions without having to advise you of your Miranda rights while you're being detained. But they have to advise you of your Miranda rights once you're arrested. You have a right to an attorney once you're arrested that you didn't have while you were being detained. So there's a legal difference, there's a legal distinction, which is why it's handled in court. There are two different things. The question in front of the Supreme Court was whether or not the officer had reasonable suspicion to make a traffic stop. You know it's not an arrest because in order to make an arrest, the officer has to have probable cause. If you're talking about reasonable suspicion, it's a detainment. Chemicals are so good. So that should be your clue. Custodial arrests, there are fine lines where you can make arguments that somebody is either detained or arrested, depending on which side of the ball you want to be on. But there is a difference between a vehicle stop and arrest. And I can explain that to you pretty quickly. A cop thinks that you are drunk. He pulls you over. You're not arrested. He asks you if you've been drinking. You say no. You're still not arrested. He smells alcohol on your breath. And he asks you to blow into his little breathalyzer. You blow into his breathalyzer and you blow higher than the legal limit. He then takes you out of the vehicle and places you in handcuffs and tells you you're under arrest. You went from being detained to being arrested. Had you blown into the little breathalyzer and blown under the legal limit, the officer would have said, "Be safe, have a nice day," and you would have continued on your way, having never been arrested. That's the difference between a vehicle stop that is a detainment and an arrest. When you are under arrest, you're in custody. And another where it gets blurry is like if the officer detains you, but he puts you in handcuffs for his safety, and he doesn't actually tell you you're under arrest, but you're in cuffs, and maybe even puts you in the back of his car. Are you under arrest? Are you being detained? That's a great question, and that's for your lawyer to argue out. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.